They are parameterized types. Okay, so whenever we want a particular logic to work out for different data types, so instead of writing separate logics or separate definitions for each and every data types, we can use generics uh, to work the same logic for different data types. Suppose if I want to find average of the numbers, so it can be integer numbers, float numbers, double or long double, different types of numbers can be there. So whatever the numbers you want to write, if it is for average of the integers, I have to write a separate method, and if it is average of the float, I have to write it as a separate method. So you need to write a separate methods for each and every data type. So instead of writing separate methods for each and every data types, using a generics, we can write only a single logic which can work for all the data types, right? And these can be implemented as a parameterized types in the Java, right? So that is what we have discussed in the last class, right? We have also seen an example, right? So this is how we create a generic class. If gen is your class name, within the angular braces you should specify the parameter t. This is the type parameter. T is called as a type parameter, and gen, which is a generic class, we call it as a parameterized type class. T is called as a type parameter. Okay, so in the yesterday we have discussed how to access these things, right? So I have created see, here is your class declaration. I have declared a variable of the type t object. Okay, now t is of object type, and here is a constructor where we are assigning the value which we are passing to the constructor to our variable ob, and we are returning a value t. So you can also return your generic types, and you can also access them. See, ob dot, I'm accessing it through ob dot get class get name. So get the name of the class to which ob belongs to, and we are trying to print that class name. And in the main class, whenever you are creating an object, okay, so there you have to specify the type, right? So when you're creating an object, the type of your parameter has to be mentioned. So what is the type of the t has to be mentioned at the time of object creation. So here if you could see gen integer, so in the place of t here I have given integer. It means that my type parameter here is now integer, right? So this is how we create an object. Gen integer of iob is equal to new gen integer of iob. So wherever your class name comes, along with that, the type will also come while creating an object. So here we are passing a value 88, which is a primitive data type integer constant, which is converted into a wrapper class. So when you create over here, it's a call to the constructor. So control comes over here to execute this constructor. So it is copied into O over here, which is of the type T. Now 88 is of the type integer, and T is O is of the type T, right? So now wherever the T is there, everywhere it will be replaced by integer. Now the 88 which I have passed is a primitive data type, and the integer is a class type, right? So this primitive data type here is converted into the integer class type object using here auto boxing, right? And the value of o is assigned to ob. Here comes your concept of auto boxing, right? So conversion t is equal to o, and where you are assigning, this will take care of the auto boxing, and it will convert it into the wrapper class type, right? So once you have assigned, and if I call show type, iob dot show type, right, then what does the show type do? It is just printing a class name for us, ob dot class name. So this prints as a value. The type of the t is java dot lang dot integer, and the value is 88. Okay, and then I'm calling the value iob dot show type. Then I'm calling iob dot get ob, right? So what does this get ob method do? See, get ob method is returning a value of your object, right? So what value you have assigned, same value it is returning. So what is the return type? It is the return type is t, means you are returning an integer, an object of an integer type, right? So when you come back over here, see, int v is equal to iob dot get ob, right? So iob dot get ob will return an value 88, which is a value of an object, means it returns actually t, which is of a class type or an object type. Now that class type we are trying to storing it into v, which is a primitive data type, right? So here comes the concept of your unboxing. Here will be a unboxing or auto unboxing which is going to happen, right? So your class type, wrapper class type integer is converted into the primitive data type and is stored into v, and you can print the value of v over here, right? Okay, similarly now the same logic can even work for a string data type. I'm creating a string object, asking it to present, and then getting it calling the get ob method, which will give return me the string value which will be stored. Now string is a already a class, so here doesn't come the concept of the unboxing or autoboxing. Only for your primitive data types it will be the problem, right? So the generics help us to create a logic which can work for different data types. Okay, so here t is called as a type parameter, and whatever the class which you are creating is a, as it takes the generic types, the class is called as a parameterized type class. Okay, and these variables, the type parameters which you are using, should be specified inside the angular braces. Wherever you are using, they should come with your class name inside the angular braces. Okay, now there are some restrictions for the generics which you are working. Am I audible, girls? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Generics have some restrictions. Here are the three limitations, or the three things which you have to consider or keep in mind when you are working with the generics. The first and the foremost thing which is the limitation of the generics is, as we have seen, generic works only with the objects. So whatever the generic classes which you are creating, they work only with the objects. So what if, why is autoboxing and unboxing should happen over here? Why can't it work directly with the primitive types? Is generics can't work with the primitive types. They work only with the objects, classes and the objects. They take only references. They work only with the objects. Generic can't work with the primitive data type. Means here I can't pass int. So something like this, writing like gen int, which is a primitive type over here. Gen int is equal to creating an object of int type. Creating an object of int type will not work. It will raise an error. Is it clear, girls? What I am saying? You can't use primitive data types as your type parameters over here. I can't create an object with int, which is a primitive type. I have to use a wrapper classes, integer, float, character. Okay, so I have to use a wrapper classes. I can't use the primitive data types to create the type parameters and create the objects, because generics won't work with the primitive data types. They work only with the objects, right? So when declaring an instance of a generic type, the type argument passed it should be of a class type. It cannot be of a primitive type. You cannot use a primitive type such as a int or a char. Okay, so if you give something like this, it will give an error. It will not work out. Okay, but still, how can we work out with the primitive classes? Is because of the auto boxing and unboxing, we can still create integer class as we have done over here. Something like this, you can create an object of a integer type, something like this, and this will work out for your primitive types even if you pass your primitive data types, because it has automatic auto boxing and unboxing. Okay, so you can solve this problem of not using unable to use your primitive classes with the help of these wrapper classes. So that's why Java has provided the wrapper classes to take care of these primitive data types even in the generics, because most of the predefined classes in your util package and all other collection classes are now generic classes. So as it has to work out even with the primitive data types, these wrapper classes were also created in the Java, right? So this Java auto boxing and auto unboxing mechanism makes use of these wrapper classes to make the use of the integer data. But still, even it helps out you can't write a statement something like this. Here you have to use a wrapper class. Is it clear, girls? So what is the first limitation of your generics? First thing what you have to remember, you have to create an object or a type parameter only of a class type. You cannot create of a primitive type. So generic works only with the objects. Is it clear, girls? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yeah. Now the next thing which you have to, second thing which you have to remember is generic types differs based on their, right. So now if you could see, I have created two objects over here. One is IOB, which is of what type? What is the type parameter of the IOB object? Yes, girls. What is the type parameter of the IOB object?
Generic type.
It is a generic type. What is the value which I have passed for the type parameter here? For IOB? Integer. IOB is an object of a generic type where I have passed the value of my type as a integer. Yes or no?
Yes,
Yes, girls. Yes. Now I have also created one more object called, see here, STROB. Right. Now STROB has what value for the type parameter? String. Yes. Now STROB is of what, belongs to which data type? Generic type. It is an object of which class? STROB is an object of which class?
integer class.
STROB is an object of gen class. And IOB is also an object of gen class. Yes or no? Both IOB and STROB are objects of a gen class. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Right. But for IOB, the type parameter is of type is integer, and for STROB, the type parameter is string. But what is this? IOB and STROB both are the objects of a same class. Yes. So now here is, can I write something like this? IOB is equal to STROB. Can we assign one object of to another object of a same class? Yes. If A1, A2 are two objects of class A, I can assign A1 is equal to A2. We have done so many times in our classes also. Copy constructor and all that we have done it, right? So we can assign one object to another object directly. It can be done. Now IOB and STROB both belongs to the same class, but I still can't assign one object to an other object over here. Why? Because if for IOB, which though it belongs to the class gen, the type parameter for IOB is integer and the type parameter for STROB is string. Right. So you can't assign a statement something like this: IOB is equal to STROB or STROB is equal to IOB. Why? Because IOB is having a type parameter of integer type and STROB is having a type parameter of a string type. So such type of assignments cannot be valid over here, and it raises an error if you do such thing by the generics, and it will not raise an error if you do it directly with your objects. Right. Is it clear, girls? So the thing which you have to understand here is they are not compatible, though they belongs to the same class, as their values, type parameter values are different. They are not compatible, right? So as the verb belongs to the same thing, they cannot be allowed to be assigned, right? So this is what called as a type safety. The type of the STROB is string and the type of the IOB is integer. So it is not allowing you to assign. So here provides the generics the type safety and allow us to prevent the errors. If I try to assign and if it works fine, then you will be getting ambiguity in your values, right? So such type of things will be avoided by using the generics. Is it clear, girls? So generic types differs based on their type arguments. Whatever the value you are passing to your type parameter, based on the value, they are different, they are not same, they are not compatible, right? So this is also what you have to remember when working with the generics. Next, how can they improve so they provide us the type safety in this way. So how can generics improve the type safety? Actually, we can achieve the same thing of generics even using objects. I told you in the last class, what is the superclass of all the classes? It is the object class, right? So instead of creating a generic type as we have done it in our program, so instead of creating a class gen and t, if my ob is of the type object class type, so can't I assign any value to it, an integer type? Even generics has a limitation that it works only with the objects, right? Now if that is the case, so if I instead of a type parameter which I'm using over here t, if I take my object my data type value as object type, class object type, will it not work? Can't I assign any value to it? Can't I assign a subclass object to a superclass? Can we assign a subclass object to a superclass, girls? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Now instead of t, if I take it as object, which is a superclass for all the classes. So any class object I can assign integer object to it, I can assign a float object, a string object, any class object, array object, any object I can assign it to this variable. Yes or no? Yes or no? You can
Yes.
assign any object to it. Yes, right. But so the same thing what you are achieving through the generics can also be achieved through an object by specifying a type parameter as an object type. Okay, but the only thing is the advantage of using the generics over the object classes, the generics automatically ensure you for the type safety for all your things, all your operations which you are working, and they eliminate the need to type check and perform the type casting on by hand. Means manually you need not check for the data type. See, here is the same program written, again assigning the value and returning value and returning the class type over here. The same program now written using, instead of generics, written using object class. See what is the problem which we have over here. See, class non-gen, it's a normal non-generic class done through the object. Now he see here my ob is of type object, right? And inside the constructor I'm assigning the o value to ob, and get ob will return the ob value, and show type will return me the class name, right? So this is my class, and as usual, see, in the main class I'm now creating an object of iob, right, and assigning the value 88 over here. So here still iob is an object of a class type, right? So 88 is a primitive data type, so when I'm passing the value here, again still the auto boxing will be working, right? So when I call the constructor, control comes over here, right? So o is of object, and 88 is of primitive type, so 88 will be converted into integer class type, wrapper class type, and will be assigned to o. So now an integer object is assigned to o, means a subclass object to assign it to the superclass. So this will work fine. So o value can be assigned to ob without any problem, right? And now iob dot show type. And now the problem occurs when we try to call the uh, get ob value. So what is the get ob function return here? What is the data type, return type of the get ob? It is of a object type. It returns ob. Ob is of the object type. It returns an object, right? Now when I call iob dot get ob, here comes the problem, right? So iob get ob will return what? An object type, right? Object, now I have to store it integer type. Now, okay, if I take v as a primitive type, if it returns a normal integer object also, using auto boxing, I can convert a wrapper class type to the integer type. But the problem here is, can I, what is the type which has been returned? It is of the integer type. Once it is uh, uh, IOB is of an integer type, so it will return what do you say, an integer type over here. Now when whatever you are returning is of a object type and the receiving variable is of a integer type. The thing is, can I assign now object type to a integer type? In other words, can I assign a superclass object to a subclass? Yes. What you are returning here is of object type. In this case, in the constructor, what I am sending is an integer type and receiving is a object type. Okay. So, using the concept that subclass object can be assigned to the superclass, this will work fine. There is no problem. But in reverse, when you are returning back, you are returning an object type. The return type is object. You are returning an object type, and the receiving variable here, when you call this method, is a integer type. Right. Okay, or unboxing will work. Okay, but at least, but can we assign a superclass object to the subclass? Is it possible? Yes? Can we assign a superclass object to a subclass? Girls, respond. Can we assign a superclass object to a subclass?
No, ma'am.
Say yes or no. A subclass object can be assigned to a superclass. Can we assign a superclass object to a subclass?
No, ma'am.
No, we can't do. We can't assign a superclass object to a subclass. So IOB get IOB will return me a object type, and I want to store it into an integer type, which is not possible. So what we are doing, we need to do the casting, typecast. So convert your object type into the integer type and then try to store it, where again unboxing will be happening. Right. So the object type has to be converted it into the integer type. Explicit typecasting is required over here to store back the value if you take a object type. So this is not required when you are doing it with the generics. See, in the generics, when I call the get OB, am I doing any typecasting over here to store my value? No, right. But when you are doing the same thing with the object class, to store your value, you need to do the typecasting, right? And this will happen for each and every data type. So suppose if I am using a string data type, even for string, I have to do the typecasting, because what is returned will be of object type. I have to typecast it into the string type and try to assign it. Okay, so here explicit typecasting is required if you work out with the objects instead of generics, right? And one more thing, as I told, IOB is equal to STROB, right? So with generics, if you use this statement IOB is equal to STROB, it raises an error because IOB and STROB are not compatible. They have different type parameters, right? But in this case, IOB and STROB are of a same class objects of this class non-gen, right? So what is the problem of assigning IOB to STROB? So this statement IOB is equal to STROB will not raise any error for us when you try to execute. Though they are not compatible, though the STROB is for the string and IOB is for integer, but still you can assign the value STROB to IOB, which is not compatible. Actually it is wrong, but still we can do it and we doesn't get any error. Logically it's wrong, but syntactically it doesn't raise any error for us. Okay, so you cannot avoid such errors. And after, if this is possible, if you try to get the value uh, v is equal to integer dot get ob, means strob assigning, now it is a string object actually. So and using that, if you're trying to convert a string value into integer and trying to store it into a variable, then you'll be getting the runtime error. So you can't avoid the errors which you get later on if you do not use the generics, right? So this is so instead of using an objects, so if you use the objects, they make us early notification of the errors for the things objects which are not compatible, right? And they provide the type safety over here, right? So this is how the generics provide the type safety. They warn us here itself. At this statement only you will be getting a warning, if you use generics, but object you will be getting an error over here at this point when you try to access the values, right? So early warning will be given by the generics. So efficiently it handles the type safety when compared to the objects, and this explicit type casting also will not be required with the generics. That is what we are saying over here, right? So that doesn't allow, it eliminates the need for you to enter the casts and do it by hand, and it allows the type safety for all your operations which are involved with the generic. So this is the third thing which improves the, which you have to understand with the generics. They provide the type safety. Okay, so what is the first one? Generics works only with the objects, so it can be considered as a limitation or it is the feature of the generics. And next, the two different types will have different arguments. They are different because they are not compatible, right? And J improve this type safety and allow us not to do any casting, right? Doesn't need any casting over here. Is it clear, girls? Why can't we use objects, and why generics are more efficient than using an object class?
Yes, ma'am.
So many type mismatches which cannot be found out till you get a runtime error. No compile time error will be given, girls. You will be only getting a runtime error. Logical mistakes will be there. So you will be getting only the runtime errors at that point. Exceptions will be raised. Okay, so you can avoid the exceptions if you use the generics instead of object class. Right. Now these generics can also have two type parameters. Whatever the example we have seen previously, as that class has only one parameter, you can also have a generics with two parameters. So you can declare more than one type parameter in the generics. If you want to use more than one type parameters, separate them by comma. So here is how. If you want T and V as two parameters, so you can declare something like this: class 2gen. 2gen is your class name where I'm having T comma V. So T is of one type, V is of one type. So see here, I'm passing one as an integer and V. So T OB1 as object and V is of the type, OB2 is of the type V. I'm just assigning the values and trying to print those values. Getting, I've returned two methods, get OB1 and get OB2, to return the value of OB1 and OB2, T type and V type. Now coming to your main class, simple gen. See, this is how you create an object. 2gen integer comma string. So I'm see in the type parameters. Now I'm passing two values. T integer is for T. So in the which order you have specified, in the same order it will be going. T comma V, right? So integer is for T and string is for V, right? So new TG, I have passed integer as 88 and string as a generics, right? So in again here auto boxing will be happening, right? So int v is equal to tg ob1 dot get ob1. So when you call the constructor, here comes the values and it assigns the o1 o2 values, o1 value to ob1 and o2 value to ob2. And next when I call the method get ob1, sorry, next I'm calling a show types. Show types will print the names, class names of ob1 and ob2, right? So it prints that T is of integer and V is of the string type, what value which I have passed, and I'm trying to print the value of OB1 and OB2, right? So it prints the values as 88 and generics, right? So you can pass any number of parameters, not only a single parameter. You can have generics with two parameters or three parameters also. So here is an example with the two parameters. So you can have type arguments list. It's not restricted. So here would be the syntax. You can have a number of parameters. Each of them would be separated by a space. And accordingly, how many parameters you are having, those many things have to be specified while creating the object. That is what you have to mention. So if it is 2 parameters while creating an object, you have to mention the girls. Am I audible, girls?
Now, yes, ma'am.
Now you
There
are,
was some
ma'am. Yes,
network
ma'am.
issue. There was some network issue. Okay. Yeah, right. So you can specify any number of types. Each of them has to be separated by comma. And while creating an object, just see how many parameters you have given in your declaration. Those many has to be taken, has to be specified while creating the objects, right? And we can also have a generics with the bounded types. Bounded here indicates that now as we have mentioned, if it is a generic type, you can pass any data type. So in the previous case, if you could see, I can pass an integer type, a string type, a float type, any different types, right? So if my class is like some restricted class which can take only numeric values, suppose if I'm calculating average of numbers, so I cannot take average of a string values, right? So it could be only for a numeric value. So in such cases, I can restrict what type of objects can my generic class take or generic parameter can take by specifying a bounded types. Okay. So the type parameters could be replaced by any class type. You can give any class type, but it is useful sometimes to limit the types that we can pass to a type parameter. As I told, if it is an average, we want only the numeric types like integer, float, double or something. We don't want string or character over here, right? So you can restrict. So if you want to restrict here, suppose if I want to find an average, if I'm doing something like this, sum is equal to sum plus nums of I and double of value, you will be getting an error if nums is of a generic type. Means if you're calculating the sum of the values per an array, if num is of a generic type and I'm doing it for something like a strings and all, it will raise an error. Okay, if number is of a generic array and for that instead of numeric value, if I am passing something like a string or a character and I am trying to find a sum, it will raise an error, right? So to solve this, we can specify what should be the t type. Okay, so if you're finding an average, even if it is an integer and all also, because it can take all different types, it will raise an error. So you cannot perform such operations on generic step, generic step. So you have to specify some boundaries for your generic type, which can be handled through the bounded type, right? So that you can specify using this syntax. T extends a superclass. So mention a superclass which can restrict your values which can be assigned to T. So once you say T extends the superclass, it means that you can assign a value which can be of the type superclass or any of its subclasses type, not about that, not other than that. You can pass only the superclass type or any of its subclasses type to T. Other than that, we cannot do. So for example, if I want to assign only numeric value, so I am saying T extends number. So when I say T extends number, the number is actually a superclass, predefined superclass present in the Java, which can take all your numeric type like int, float and double. So even your integer wrapper class type, your float wrapper class type, double wrapper class type are all the subclasses of this number class. So I can assign my type parameter as a number or a integer type or as a float type, right? So here is how you can write the class now, a stats class which takes care to find out the average of the numbers. So T extends number. So I've created an array of the type T, right? I'm assigning a value O, the array value, to the nums, and I'm calculating the number. For I is equal to 0, I less the nums dot length, I plus plus sum is equal to sum plus nums of I dot double value. So get the value as a double value, get the double value and add it to the sum, right? And return the average, right? So we can calculate the average. Now even if this is for the integers, now if I try to create a strings type, okay, and try to assign, it will raise an error. This will raise an error. We can't do, because string is not a subclass of a number, so we cannot create an object of a string type. We cannot create this thing. Such things cannot be created. It will raise an error automatically, because str, string, is not a type subclass of a number, or string is not of a type number, so that's why it will not work out. So we cannot do this. This will raise an error, right? So thereby you can restrict. Now in the previous class, if you do not use this extends, if you do not use this extends, t extends number, you would have also you could have already also created this string type, right? And that will not be the case if you use this extends. Bounded types, we call them as a bounded type. So generics, you can also specify the bounded types, restricting them to use only a specific type of the values, okay? And you can also use not only a class, you can also make for an interface also. Means t extends not only a class, but you can also inherit t specifying of a type interface. So if you are only having an interface, then you can say t implements that interface. If you are having both class and an interface to be specified over here for the type, then you can say t extends my class and interfaces. Okay, so my class is a class and my interface is a interface. So you can use this syntax, my class and interface. So if you're having only class, just say it as extends. If you're having only interface, just say it as implements. T implements in interface, right? And if it is both interface and a class, then you have to write it using this. T extends my class and my interface. Using and operator, you have to do it. You can also use what called as a wildcard arguments. You know what is a wildcard, right? So when we doesn't know who exactly, even in your game shows or reality shows, you will be using these wildcard entries. So what is the meaning of wildcard entry? They doesn't know till the end. They will not be knowing who is the person who is going to join the team, or who is the person who is going to come. Yes or no? In the middle, they will enter without knowing their details till the end. As a suspense, they will be entering. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So similarly here also, you can work out with what called as a wildcards, even with the Java, with your generics also, right? So here, if you could see, when I'm calculating the in the previous example, I have calculated the average of the numbers. So to restrict it to the numeric type, I have taken it as a bounded type, right? Now the thing is, if I want to compare two averages, one is of a double type and one is of an integer type, and check whether both of them are same or not. Means, is that I want to calculate the average of two students. For the first student, I have taken a parameter type as an integer, and for the second student, I have taken it as a double type, or an float type, or whatever it is, right? So now double type is of a separate object and float type is of a separate object. And according to the first restriction, what we have seen, the two different arguments are of different type here, right? So generic types differs based on their type argument. So I cannot assign one object type to an other object. Do it is string, do it is double or float. I cannot assign even a integer object to a double type over here, right? So the assignment of an objects is restricted. You cannot assign one object of uh, uh, your generics to another type of an object. So when you cannot assign, how can we compare? So if I'm having a method something like this, same average, to check if the average of the first method is same as a average of the second method. So with one, suppose if I'm calling them, the other one I have to pass it as an argument. So what should be type of this OB which I am passing? Is it of a type integer? So here stats object I have to specify. So is it of integer? Is it of double? I can't specify exactly over here, right? because it takes based on which one I am taking as an input. It is a dynamic value which I am using over here. Maybe it's a int, maybe it's a double or something else. So what I'll pass will be known only at the dynamic time when I create an object, right? So till now, till that time, I can't specify it as a generic type T. Okay, so what should I do? Because if I keep generic type T, it will not allow me to compare because they are not compatible. So if I just put integer, it will not work out if I give double, and if I put double, it will not work out because it will be an if I send an integer, right? So instead of that, I can put what is called as a wild card entry over here, which is represented by a question mark. Now when I put a wildcard entry over here, it will take any value which I give, maybe integer, double, or whatever I give, it will accept and it will work out and allow us to compare. Okay, girls. So you can also use a wildcards in this case, where a wildcard entry is represented as a question mark as an argument, which takes any data type whichever you pass over at the time of the function called dynamically. Is it clear, girls?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Let me just take the attendance list. One second, please.
I'm sure.
The document, ma'am.
Yeah, I'll share it. One second, let me just check the attendance. Okay, ma, I got the attendance. You can leave.